Somewhere beyond the last streetlight, beyond the final whisper of atmosphere, the universe stretches into a darkness so complete that clocks begin to lose their meaning. Out there, where no sunrise marks the hours and no calendar squares away the days, time itself becomes something other than what we know. The question rises like mist from a still lake. What if the cosmos never truly began? And what if it will never truly end? What if all our metaphors of birth and death, of first spark and final silence, are simply the way our small minds try to hold something that cannot be held? Tonight, we let that question settle softly around us. We follow it not to solve it, but to walk beside it, to let its strangeness become a kind of companion. If you find comfort in these wanderings through the endless and the ancient, you might return to this quiet place, where the universe unfolds in whispers rather than equations. For now, we begin where all night journeys begin, by letting go of the need to arrive and learning instead to drift. Imagine standing at the edge of everything you know. Not a physical edge, but the border where certainty gives way to wonder. Behind you, the warm lights of the familiar. Days that follow nights, seasons that turn in their patient circles, stories with clear beginnings and satisfying conclusions. Ahead, the vast dark, punctuated by distant points of light that have traveled so far to reach your eyes that their journey spans epochs you can barely name. Some of those photons left their stars before your ancestors learned to speak, before continents took their current shapes, before the first forests decided to become coal and oil, and eventually the fuel that powers the cities whose glow now hides those very stars from view. The universe we see is old, unimaginably old. When astronomers turn their instruments toward the farthest reaches, they are also turning them backward through time, watching light that has been traveling for billions upon billions of years. They can trace this story almost all the way back to what they call a beginning, a moment of explosive becoming when space itself started to expand, carrying matter and energy along with it like debris on a sudden tide. But even as they trace this history, a strange puzzle emerges. If there was a beginning, what came before it? And if space is expanding, what is it expanding into? These questions do not have comfortable answers. They do not resolve into neat conclusions. Instead, they open onto a landscape where our everyday logic begins to falter, where the grammar of cause and effect starts to blur. It is a landscape worth exploring, not because it will give us mastery or control, but because it reminds us how much larger existence is than our models of it. It whispers that the universe may not need our permission to be strange, to operate by rules that feel foreign to our intuition, to simply be in a way that defies the neat packaging of beginnings and endings. So we step into that landscape now, gently, without hurry. We will visit ideas that scientists and philosophers have entertained, notions that hover at the edge of the knowable. We will not pretend to certainty, but we will allow ourselves to imagine. We will let the cosmos unfold in our minds the way it seems to unfold in itself, patiently, vastly, without rushing toward any particular conclusion. And perhaps in that unfolding, we will find a kind of peace, the peace that comes from acknowledging that we are part of something far older and far stranger than we can ever fully grasp. The night sky is patient. It has been watching longer than we have been asking. It will continue long after our questions fade into silence. But tonight, under that watching sky, we ask anyway, softly, what if there was no beginning? What if there will be no end? What if the universe is not a story with chapters, but a condition, a state of being that simply is and always has been and always will be? Let that question hum quietly in the back of your mind as we wander further. Let it become a rhythm, a gentle pulse, like the distant beating of some cosmic heart that has never stopped and will never start, because it exists outside the very idea of starting and stopping. We are not here to answer. We are here to listen, to drift, to let the strange beauty of it all wash over us like starlight on water. In the old days of exploration, mapmakers would draw their known world in careful detail, and then, at the borders where knowledge gave way to rumor and fear, they would write warnings. Here be dragons, here be monsters. The edge of the map was not just a line where paper ran out, it was a threshold where certainty ended and imagination took over. But here is the curious thing. Every time an explorer sailed past that edge, the world did not end. The sea continued, new lands appeared, the map grew larger, and the edge simply moved further out. When we ask what came before the beginning of the universe, we are standing at a kind of edge. Not a physical edge in space, but a conceptual border in our understanding. The story we tell ourselves, the one built from decades of careful observation and brilliant mathematics, says that roughly 13.8 billion years ago, space and time emerged together in an event so swift and so total that it defies ordinary language. Before that moment, the story suggests, there was no before. Time itself did not exist. The question of what came before is like asking what is north of the North Pole. The question uses words that seem to make sense, but they point toward something that cannot exist within the framework that gives them meaning. And yet we ask it anyway. We cannot help but ask it. Our minds are built to track causes, to trace chains of events backward and forward. When we see a river, we wonder about its source. When we watch a plant grow, we think about the seed. Everything in our experience has a before, a context from which it emerged. So when faced with the idea of a universe that simply began, with no prior state, no earlier condition, something in us resists. It feels incomplete, like a story missing its first page. Some thinkers have suggested that the question itself may be flawed. Perhaps time is not the absolute independent river we imagine it to be. Perhaps it is more like a property of the universe, something that emerges along with space and matter rather than a stage on which those things perform. If time is not fundamental, if it is instead something that arises under certain conditions, then asking what came before time began is indeed like asking what is north of the North Pole. It is a grammatical puzzle, not a real mystery. But there are other possibilities, quieter and stranger. What if the beginning we observe is not the absolute beginning? What if the explosive expansion that we call the birth of our universe was actually a transition, a change of state, a moment when something that already existed transformed into something new? Imagine water becoming ice. The ice has a clear point of origin, a moment when it solidified, but the water was there before. The ice did not come from nothing, it came from a different arrangement of the same substance. Some models propose that our universe emerged from a previous state, perhaps from an earlier universe that collapsed and then rebounded, like a wave that crashes and then rises again. In this view, what we call the beginning is just one beat in an eternal rhythm, a pulse in a process that has no first beat and no last. Time stretches back beyond our observable horizon, not into nothingness, but into other forms, other arrangements, other chapters in a story that may have no opening sentence. Others imagine a kind of timeless field, a background condition from which universes bubble up like foam on the surface of the ocean. Each bubble is a cosmos, with its own laws and its own internal sense of time. But the field itself simply exists, without beginning or end. From within our bubble, we see what looks like a starting point, but that is only because our perspective is limited, because we are looking at the boundary of our own particular cosmos and mistaking it for the boundary of everything. These ideas are not proven. They are not facts in the way that the rising of the sun is a fact. They are more like dreams that mathematics has dreamed. Possibilities that emerge when brilliant minds push the equations as far as they will go and then gently, carefully, one step further. And in that space beyond the edge of the map, where knowledge fades into speculation, we find not dragons, but something perhaps more unsettling. The possibility that existence itself has no edge, no boundary, no point at which we can say, here it all began. The stars above us are old, but they are not eternal. Each one was born from collapsing clouds of gas, and each one will eventually exhaust its fuel and fade or explode. But the material from which they formed, the hydrogen and helium and the whisper of heavier elements, that material has its own history, stretching back through earlier generations of stars, back to the early moments of this cosmic expansion, back to a time when the universe was hot and dense and simple. And if we follow that thread all the way, we reach a point where our instruments can no longer see, where the light itself has been stretched and dimmed beyond detection. But reaching the edge of what we can observe is not the same as reaching the edge of what exists. In the silence of that unknowing, there is a strange comfort. It is the comfort of recognizing that the universe does not owe us a neat origin story. It is allowed to be stranger than we can imagine, older than we can trace, more complex than our models. And in that strangeness, in that refusal to be fully known, there is a kind of grace. We are small, yes, and our understanding is limited, but we are also part of this vast, perhaps eternal unfolding, and that is enough. The edge of the map is not where the world ends. It is where our certainty ends and wonder begins. And so we stand at that edge, not with fear, but with a quiet curiosity, and we let ourselves imagine what might lie beyond. Not because we will ever draw that distant territory with perfect accuracy, but because the act of imagining, the willingness to entertain the impossible, is itself a way of honoring the strangeness of existence. The universe is under no obligation to make sense to us, but we are under no obligation to stop wondering. Picture a house with infinite rooms. You walk through one door and find a hallway that stretches beyond sight, lined with more doors, each one opening onto another space. Some rooms are vast, some are small, but no matter how many you pass through, there is always another. There is no final chamber, no outer wall where you can say, here is the end of the house. You are always somewhere in the middle, always surrounded by more rooms, more passages, more thresholds. This is one way to imagine a universe without boundaries. Not a space that goes on forever in the way a straight highway seems to stretch toward an infinite horizon, but a structure where the very concept of an outer limit simply does not apply. The universe, in this view, is not expanding into some pre-existing emptiness. It is creating space as it goes, and space itself may have no edge, no border, no point at which you could press your hand against a wall and say, beyond this, there is nothing. Our minds struggle with this. We are creatures of surfaces and boundaries. We live on the skin of a planet contained by its atmosphere, walking across land that has shores and borders. Everything in our experience has an inside and an outside, a here and a there, but space itself may not honor those distinctions. It may simply be vast and continuous, folding back on itself in ways that make the idea of an edge irrelevant. One possibility is that the universe is shaped in a way that is hard to visualize but mathematically coherent. Imagine the surface of a sphere. You can travel in any direction, and you will never reach an edge. Never fall off, never find a boundary. If you walk long enough, you will eventually return to where you started, having circled the globe. Now imagine something similar, but in 3 dimensions rather than 2. A space that curves back on itself so subtly that you would never notice. A geometry where every direction eventually loops around. In such a cosmos, you could travel in a straight line forever and never leave, never arrive at an outer limit, because there is no outer limit to arrive at. But there are other models, stranger still, that do not require this looping. They propose that space is simply infinite, extending without end in all directions. In this view, if you could somehow travel fast enough and far enough, you would keep encountering new galaxies, new clusters, new structures forever. There would be no repetition, no return, just an endless unfolding of stars and voids. And within that endlessness, there would be room for every possible arrangement of matter, every variation, every story that physics allows. Somewhere in that infinite expanse, there might be another planet so similar to ours that its trees bend in the same wind, its oceans crash on the same shores, not because of magic or fate, but simply because infinity has room for everything, including the unlikeliest of coincidences. This notion troubles some and thrills others. It suggests that existence is far more extravagant than we tend to imagine, that the cosmos is not a single, carefully curated story, but a wild proliferation of every possibility. If space is truly infinite, then there is no scarcity of locations, no limit to how many worlds can exist, no final count of stars. The night sky above you contains billions of galaxies, and each galaxy contains billions of stars. But even that staggering abundance is just a fragment, just the part of the whole that light has had time to reach us from. Beyond what we can see, there may be more, and more, and more still, without end. And if space has no end, what does that mean for the question of a beginning? Some models suggest that an infinite universe has always been infinite, that even in its earliest moments, when it was hot and dense, it was still boundless. The expansion we observe is not the universe growing from small to large, but rather the stretching of something that was already infinite, the increasing of distances between points that were already infinitely numerous. It is a difficult picture to hold in the mind, like trying to imagine a number that is already infinite suddenly becoming larger. But the mathematics allows it, and so we allow ourselves to consider it gently, without insisting on perfect intuition. There are also ideas that speak of other regions, other domains, where the laws of physics might be different, where the constants that govern matter and energy take on different values. These regions, sometimes called bubble universes or pocket universes, would be causally disconnected from ours, meaning that no signal, no light, no information could ever travel between them and us. They would be beyond our horizon in a fundamental way, not just far away, but separated by the very structure of space and time. And if such regions exist, then the totality of existence is not just large, but categorically larger than we can observe. Our universe, the one we call home, might be just one room in that infinite house, one bubble in an eternal foam. This is not science fiction, though it sounds like it. These are ideas that emerge from taking our best theories and asking what they imply when extended beyond the realm of direct observation. They are speculative, yes, but they are disciplined speculation, constrained by the rules of mathematics and the patterns we have observed. They are the maps we draw when we push past the edge of the known, when we let the equations guide us into the territory where intuition falters. And there is a quietness to it all, a sense that the universe is not shouting its secrets at us, but simply existing in its own patient way. It does not need us to understand it. It does not require our comprehension to continue its vast unfolding. But we, restless and curious, we ask anyway. We imagine the rooms within rooms, the spaces beyond spaces, the endlessness that might surround us on all sides. And in that imagining, we find not terror, but a strange and gentle awe. There is no final room. There is no last door. The house goes on, and we wander through it, inhabitants of one small corridor, marveling at the architecture, at the way it all fits together without ever needing to end. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the beauty is not in finding the boundary, but in realizing there might not be one, and learning to live with that openness, that vastness, that refusal of the universe to be contained. There is a river that flows through the center of our understanding, a river that seems to move in only one direction. We call it time, and we feel its current in everything we do. Ice melts into water, buildings crumble into dust, memories fade. The river carries us forward, and we have never seen it reverse. We have never watched a shattered glass leap back together, never seen smoke coiled back into flame. The flow is relentless, gentle perhaps, but unyielding. This flow has a name in physics, a concept called entropy. It is a measure of disorder, of the tendency for organized structures to break down, for differences to smooth out, for everything to drift toward a state of sameness. A hot cup of coffee cools to match the temperature of the room. A mountain, over eons, erodes into plains. The universe itself, vast and varied as it is, seems to be slowly, patiently moving toward a state of uniform thinness, a final condition where all the stars have burned out, all the black holes have evaporated, and nothing remains but a cold, featureless sea of particles spread so thin that they barely interact at all. If this is true, if the universe is indeed sliding toward this so-called heat death, then it would seem that time must have a direction, and perhaps even a beginning. After all, if everything is winding down, then there must have been a moment when it was wound up, when the universe was in a state of high order, low entropy, full of potential. That moment, we are told, was the beginning, the explosive start when space and energy were compressed into a state so dense and so organized that everything since has been a long, slow unraveling. But here is where the story becomes strange. Entropy is not a fundamental law in the way that gravity or electromagnetism is a law. It is a statistical tendency, a pattern that emerges when you are dealing with vast numbers of particles. It is not that it is impossible for a shattered glass to reassemble itself, but rather that it is staggeringly unlikely, so unlikely that we have never observed it and never expect to. The river of time in this view is not a built-in feature of reality, but a consequence of probability, a habit that the universe follows because the odds favor it so overwhelmingly. And if entropy is a habit rather than a rule, then what does that mean for the question of a beginning? Some thinkers have suggested that the universe might not be a single linear story of winding down, but rather a process that can reset, that can move through cycles of high and low entropy. In this view, what we call the beginning might be a moment of low entropy that arose from a previous state, a fluctuation or a phase transition that created the conditions for our current cosmic chapter. And if such transitions are possible, then perhaps they have happened before and will happen again. And the river of time is not a straight line, but a series of loops, or a braided stream with many channels. Imagine a vast landscape of possibilities, where the universe can take on countless different configurations. Most of those configurations are high entropy states, disordered and featureless. But occasionally, perhaps through random fluctuation or through some process we do not yet understand, the universe dips into a low entropy state. And from that dip, a new chapter begins. Stars form, galaxies condense, life emerges. And then, gradually, the entropy climbs again, and the universe spreads thin, until perhaps, in some distant future, another fluctuation occurs, and the cycle begins anew. This is not a proven model. It is not the consensus view, but it is one of many ideas that scientists entertain when they try to make sense of the directionality of time without requiring an absolute beginning. It suggests that the arrow of time, the sense that the future is different from the past, might be a local phenomenon, a pattern that holds within our particular cosmic epoch, but not necessarily throughout all of existence. In other epochs, in other phases, time might flow differently, or might not flow at all in the way we understand it. There is also the possibility that entropy is not the whole story, that our universe is more complex than a simple slide toward disorder. Perhaps there are pockets, regions, where order can spontaneously increase, where gravity pulls matter together and creates new structures, new opportunities for complexity. Stars themselves are examples of this. They condense from diffuse clouds, and in their cores, they forge heavier elements, building up complexity even as the broader universe spreads thin. Life, too, is a kind of local decrease in entropy, a gathering of order and information in the midst of a general trend toward disorder. So, the river of time, on close inspection, is not as simple as it first appears. It is not a single uniform current, but a flow with eddies and countercurrents, with places where the water swirls back on itself, where complexity briefly increases before being carried forward again. And if the flow is that complex, that textured, then perhaps the question of a beginning becomes less urgent. Perhaps the universe is not a story with a clear starting point, but a process with many phases, many rhythms, many overlapping timescales. We sit beside this river, watching it pass, knowing that we are part of its current, that our lives, our thoughts, our very sense of self are patterns in the flow. And we wonder, where does it come from? Where is it going? Is there a source, a spring from which it first bubbled up? Or has it always been flowing, in one form or another, without origin and without destination, simply moving, because that is what rivers do? The question does not demand an answer. It asks only to be held gently, the way you might hold a smooth stone from a riverbed, cool and worn by the passage of countless years. The river is patient. It has carried more questions than we can count, and it will carry more long after we are gone. But tonight, we are here, beside it, listening to its quiet murmur, feeling its presence, letting it remind us that we are part of something far older and far stranger than we can fully grasp. And in that reminder, there is a kind of peace. Imagine lungs so vast that their inhale takes billions of years, their exhale just as long. The universe, in some models, breathes. It expands, swelling outward, galaxies fleeing from one another, space itself stretching like the skin of a balloon being inflated. And then perhaps it pauses, and then it contracts, pulling everything back together, galaxies rushing toward one another, space collapsing, until all the vastness compresses into a single point, impossibly dense, impossibly hot. And then in that compression, something shifts, some threshold is crossed, and the universe rebounds, expanding again, beginning a new breath. This is the image of a cyclic cosmos, a universe that does not have a single beginning or a single end, but rather moves through an eternal rhythm of expansion and contraction, of birth and rebirth. It is an old idea, in some ways, echoing ancient intuitions about cycles and returns, but it is also a modern one, grounded in mathematical models and cosmological observations. It is a way of imagining that the Big Bang, the explosive event we call the start of our universe, might not be the absolute origin of everything, but simply the most recent in a series of expansions, a beat in a drum that has been sounding forever. The appeal of this model is emotional as well as intellectual. There is something comforting about the idea of cycles, about the notion that endings are not final, that what collapses can rise again. It fits a pattern we see elsewhere, the turning of seasons, the rhythm of day and night, the cycles of growth and decay in nature. But the universe is not obliged to comfort us, and the cyclic model faces challenges. One of the biggest is entropy, that persistent tendency toward disorder. If each cycle leaves the universe a bit more disordered than before, then tracing the cycles backward would eventually bring you to a point of perfect order, which would itself require an explanation. The cycles might stretch far into the past, but if they are not truly eternal, if entropy steadily increases, then the question of a beginning simply shifts rather than dissolving. Still, some versions of the cyclic model propose mechanisms to reset entropy, to allow the universe to bounce back not just physically, but thermodynamically, restoring the order necessary for a fresh start. These are speculative, and they require exotic physics, conditions and processes that we have not observed and perhaps cannot observe. But they are not impossible. They are, at the very least, mathematically consistent, which means they occupy a place in the landscape of possibilities, even if we cannot yet determine whether they describe our actual universe. Another variation imagines that the universe does not collapse and rebound in a single unified motion, but rather that different regions might oscillate at different rates, creating a patchwork of expansions and contractions, a cosmos that breathes unevenly, asynchronously. In such a model, what we call our universe might be just one region in a much larger, more complex structure, a single cell in a vast organism that has no single heartbeat, but rather a multitude of overlapping rhythms. Or consider this. What if the universe is always expanding, never contracting, but within that expansion, there are processes that give birth to new regions, new domains, each with its own local sense of time and space? These regions might bud off from one another, like branches on a tree, or like bubbles forming in boiling water. Each one would have its own beginning, its own history. But the tree or the pot or the underlying field from which they emerge would be eternal, ongoing, without start or finish. From within any one bubble, it would look like a universe with a clear origin, a moment of creation. But from a broader perspective, it would be clear that creation is not a one-time event, but a continuous process, happening over and over in countless locations forever. This is sometimes called eternal inflation, and it is one of the more widely discussed ideas in modern cosmology. It suggests that the explosive expansion we observe is not unique, but rather a common occurrence in a larger framework, a process that happens repeatedly, endlessly, across a vast and perhaps infinite expanse. Our universe in this view is just one outcome, one bubble among many, and the totality of existence is far larger, far stranger, and far more prolific than we can observe from our small corner. The breathing cosmos, in whatever form it takes, offers a way to think about time that is not linear but cyclical or branching, a way to imagine existence that does not require a single absolute beginning. It makes room for the possibility that the question, "What came before?" has an answer, even if that answer is simply another breath, another cycle, another chapter. It suggests that the universe is not a fragile one-time event, but a robust, ongoing process, capable of renewal, of transformation, of continuing in forms we have not yet imagined. There is a rhythm to it all, a sense of pattern and repetition, even if the details of each cycle or each bubble are unique. And in that rhythm, there is a kind of music, a deep and patient melody that has been playing for longer than we can measure and will continue long after we are gone. We are part of that music, a few notes in a symphony that has no opening bar and no final chord, just movement, variation, the endless play of themes and counterpoints. And so the cosmos breathes, in and out, expanding and perhaps contracting, giving birth to new regions, new domains, new stories. It does not hurry, it does not tire. It simply continues in its vast and patient way, and we, fleeting witnesses, are here for a moment to notice, to wonder, to let ourselves be carried by the rhythm. There is no need to understand it fully. There is only the invitation to listen, to feel the pulse, to recognize that we are part of something far larger than ourselves, something that breathes with a depth and a patience that humbles all our questions. Before there was light, before there was matter, before there was even space in the way we understand it, there may have been something else. Not nothing, but a field, a condition, a background hum of potential. It had no shape, no temperature, no location, because those concepts require a cosmos already in motion. But it was there, or rather, it was the precondition for there to be a there at all. And in that field, something stirred. This is the language of quantum field theory, the branch of physics that describes the fundamental forces and particles of nature, not as tiny billiard balls, but as excitations in fields that fill all of space. An electron is a ripple in the electron field. A photon is a ripple in the electromagnetic field. And the vacuum, the so-called empty space, is not truly empty, but seething with fields, with virtual particles that flicker into existence and then vanish, borrowing energy from the uncertainty that quantum mechanics allows. If fields are fundamental, more fundamental than particles or even space itself, then perhaps the question of a beginning needs to be reframed. Perhaps the universe did not begin with a sudden explosion, but with a shift in a field, a transition from one state to another, like water freezing into ice. The field was there, timeless, or at least existing in some sense prior to time as we know it. And then, for reasons we do not yet understand, it underwent a change. That change released energy, an enormous amount of energy, and that energy became the matter and radiation of the early universe. The expansion we observe, the galaxies and stars and planets, all of it is an after effect of that field transition, the ringing of a bell that was struck in a moment we can trace but not fully explain. This idea, sometimes called false vacuum decay or field-driven inflation, is elegant in its simplicity and strange in its implications. It suggests that the beginning of our universe was not a beginning of existence, but a beginning of structure, a moment when something that was already there took on a new form. The field itself might be eternal, or at least very old, and our universe might be just one event in its long history, one bubble or one ripple among many. And if the field can undergo one transition, why not many? Why not countless transitions, each one giving birth to a new region, a new cosmos, with its own laws and its own history. The field would be like an ocean, and each universe would be like a wave, rising and falling, distinct for a moment, but always part of the larger body of water. From within the wave, it feels like a separate existence, a unique story. But from the perspective of the ocean, it is all one motion, one substance, endlessly changing, but never truly beginning or ending. There is something deeply calming about this image. It removes the burden of absolute origin, the need to explain how something came from nothing. Instead, it proposes that something was always there, not in the form of stars and planets, but in the form of potential, a quiet field waiting to be stirred. And when it was stirred, when the conditions aligned or the fluctuations reached a threshold, a universe emerged, not from nothing, but from that prior state, that deeper level of reality. Of course, this pushes the question back a step. Where did the field come from? What sustains it? Is it truly eternal, or does it too have an origin? These are questions that current physics cannot answer. They hover at the edge of what is knowable, perhaps beyond it. But even in that unknowing, there is a kind of clarity. We admit that we do not have all the answers, that there are layers of reality we have not yet reached, and perhaps layers we will never reach. And in that admission, we find humility, and in that humility, a kind of peace. The field is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It simply is, a background to all the foreground dramas of galaxies and stars and lives. And yet without it, none of those dramas would exist. It is the canvas on which the universe paints, the silence in which music becomes possible. And if it is eternal, if it has always been there in some sense, then the universe we know is not a unique miracle, but a natural expression of something deeper, something more fundamental. This does not diminish the wonder. If anything, it deepens it, because it means that existence is not a fragile accident, a one-time fluke, but a persistent feature of reality. It means that the capacity to create, to unfold, to give rise to complexity and beauty is woven into the fabric of things. The field is not alive, not conscious, not intentional, but it is generative. It makes things possible, and in that sense, it is the closest thing to a ground of being that physics can offer, a foundation that does not rest on anything else, but simply is. We cannot see the field directly. We can only infer it from its effects, from the patterns of matter and energy, from the way particles interact, from the expansion of space itself. It is like trying to understand the ocean by studying waves without ever diving beneath the surface. But even from the waves, we can sense the depth, the vastness, the underlying unity, and that is enough, at least for now. So the field hums quietly, beneath and within everything we know. It is the ground from which the universe rises, the source from which possibilities flow. And if it is eternal, if it has no beginning and no end, then the universe we inhabit, for all its grandeur and its strangeness, is just one expression of something far older, far simpler, and far more enduring. The field is patient. It has all the time in the world. It has all the time there is. And it is here now, holding us, holding everything, in a gentle and invisible embrace. Far out beyond the last visible galaxy, there is a boundary, not a wall, not a barrier, but a horizon, a line beyond which we cannot see. It is not because there is nothing there, but because the light from those distant places has not yet had time to reach us, or because space itself is expanding so quickly that the light is being stretched and redshifted into invisibility. It is a horizon like the one you see on the ocean, where the sky seems to meet the water. You know there is more beyond it, more ocean, more sky, but from where you stand, that is the edge of your world. This horizon is called the observable universe, and it is finite. From our vantage point here, on this small planet circling an ordinary star, we can see roughly 46 billion light-years in any direction. That is the radius of the observable universe, a sphere of visibility that contains all the galaxies, all the stars, all the light that has managed to reach us since the universe became transparent, roughly 13.8 billion years ago. But that sphere is not the whole universe, it is just the part we can see. Beyond it, there is more, perhaps infinitely more. And here is where the idea of a beginning becomes complicated. Because if the universe is infinite, if it extends without end in all directions, then it has always been infinite, even at the moment we call the Big Bang. The Big Bang was not an explosion in space, but an expansion of space. And if space was infinite to begin with, then it has simply become more stretched out, but no larger in the sense of going from finite to infinite. Infinity does not grow. It is already infinite. This is difficult to hold in the mind. We are used to thinking of beginnings as starting points, as moments when something small becomes large. But in an infinite universe, there is no small. There is no starting size. There is only a state, a condition, a density. At the earliest moments we can calculate, the universe was incredibly dense, incredibly hot, but still, in some models, infinitely extended. Every point in that hot, dense state would eventually cool and spread out, becoming the galaxies and voids we see today. But at no point was there a moment when the universe had a finite size. It was always infinite, just in different states. This does not mean the universe is old in the sense of having existed for an infinite amount of time. Time in these models still has a beginning, or at least a boundary, a point before which the concept of before does not apply. But space, the stage on which time unfolds, might not have such a boundary. It might simply be vast and continuous, without edge or center. And if that is the case, then our observable universe is just a tiny patch, a local neighborhood in an infinitely larger expanse. Beyond our horizon, there are other galaxies, other clusters, other regions where the laws of physics play out in the same ways they do here, because they are part of the same cosmos, governed by the same fundamental constants. But we will never see them. They are beyond the reach of light, beyond the reach of any signal, forever hidden by the expansion of space. There is something humbling about this. It means that even our most powerful telescopes, even our most sophisticated instruments, can only ever reveal a fraction of what exists. The universe is not withholding information out of spite or secrecy. It is simply so vast and light is simply so slow that there are regions we will never know, stories that will never reach us. We are like people on an island, surrounded by an ocean so wide that we cannot see the other shores, cannot know how many other islands there are, cannot even be sure that the ocean has a far side. But there is also something freeing about it, because if the universe is that large, that extravagant, then our small corner of it, for all its beauty and complexity, is not the whole story. There is room for more, for variation, for surprise. The horizons we face are not walls that confine us, but simply the limits of our current view. And those limits do not diminish what we can see, they frame it, give it context, remind us that we are part of something far larger. And there are other horizons, not just the horizon of visibility, but horizons of understanding. There are questions we can ask that we may never be able to answer, not because we are not clever enough, but because the answers lie beyond the reach of observation, beyond the capacity of our instruments or our theories to confirm. The question of whether the universe is truly infinite or merely very large may be one of those questions. We can build models, we can test predictions, but we may never be able to say with certainty, yes, it is infinite, or no, it is finite but unbounded. We may forever be standing at the edge of what we can know, looking out into the unknown, making our best guesses, but never fully certain. And that is all right. That is, perhaps, as it should be. Because the universe is not a puzzle designed for us to solve. It is not a test with a final answer key. It is simply what it is, vast and strange and indifferent to our need for closure. And we, small and curious, are here for a brief moment, looking up, wondering, imagining. The horizons do not limit us, they invite us. They say, there is more beyond what you can see. There is always more. So we stand at the edge of our observable universe, at the boundary of our knowledge, and we let ourselves wonder. We do not need to cross the horizon to appreciate what it means. We do not need to see everything to understand that there is more. The horizon is enough. It is a reminder that existence is larger than our grasp, that mystery is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be accepted, even celebrated. And in that acceptance, we find a kind of freedom, the freedom that comes from knowing that we are part of something far older, far larger, and far stranger than we will ever fully comprehend. There is a moment that never ends, not because it stretches on and on, but because it is the only moment there is. The past, when you reach for it, is memory, a story told in the present about events that are no longer here. The future, when you try to grasp it, is imagination, a projection made in the present about events that have not yet occurred. But the present, this moment, this now, is immediate and undeniable. It is where everything happens, where everything exists, and it never stops being now. If time is real in the way we usually think it is, as a dimension through which we move from past to future, then the present is a thin edge, a knife's blade between what was and what will be. But some physicists and philosophers suggest a different view, one in which the distinction between past, present, and future is less fundamental than it seems. They propose that time, at its deepest level, is not a flowing river, but a landscape, a structure in which all moments exist equally, spread out like points on a map. In this view, the passage of time is not a feature of the universe itself, but a feature of our consciousness, the way our minds move through the landscape, experiencing one moment after another. This is called the block universe, and it has strange implications. If all moments exist equally, if the past and the future are as real as the present, then in what sense does time flow? In what sense is there a beginning or an end? The block universe suggests that the entirety of history, from the earliest moments of cosmic expansion to the farthest future imaginable, exists as a single, timeless structure. We experience it sequentially, but that is a limitation of our perspective, not a property of time itself. In such a model, the question of whether the universe has a beginning becomes a question of whether the block has an edge, a first moment, or whether it extends infinitely in the direction we call past. And if it extends infinitely, then there is no first moment, no starting point, just an endless expanse of events, all of them equally real, all of them existing in the eternal now. This is not an easy idea to live with. It suggests that the future is already written, that every choice we will make, every event that will unfold, is already part of the structure, already exists in some sense, even if we have not yet experienced it. It seems to strip away the openness of the future, the sense that what comes next is undetermined, full of possibility. But proponents of the block universe argue that our experience of choice, of uncertainty, is still real, still meaningful, even if the outcomes are part of the structure. The structure does not tell us what will happen next from our perspective. We still move through it moment by moment, discovering it as we go. And there is another view, one that rejects the block entirely, that insists time is fundamentally different from space, that the present is the only thing that is real, and the past and future are not places we can visit, but abstractions we construct. In this view, called presentism, the universe is always and only now, and the flow of time is the continual coming into being and passing away of moments. If presentism is true, then the question of a beginning is the question of whether there was a first now, a first moment of existence, or whether there has always been a now, stretching infinitely into the past. Both views have their advocates and their challenges. Neither can be easily proven or disproven because the nature of time is one of the deepest mysteries in physics and philosophy. It touches on questions of consciousness, of causation, of the structure of reality itself. And in the middle of these debates, we find ourselves, living in the only time we have ever known, the present, wondering what it means, whether it is a moment or a structure, whether it began or has always been. There is a kind of vertigo in this wondering, a sense that the ground beneath our feet is less solid than we thought. But there is also a kind of liberation, because if time is not what it seems, if the present is more than a fleeting instant, if the universe is not a simple story with a clear beginning and end, then we are free to imagine it differently. We are free to entertain possibilities that defy our intuition, to consider that existence might be stranger, more flexible, more mysterious than we ever suspected. And in that strangeness, there is beauty, because it means the universe is not a problem we can solve, not a riddle with a single answer, but a landscape we can explore, a mystery we can live within. The eternal present is not a philosophical abstraction. It is the reality we inhabit every moment of our lives. It is this breath, this thought, this sensation of being here, now, aware. And if the universe has no beginning and no end, then this moment is not a brief flicker between a finite past and a finite future, but a point in an infinite expanse, a now that has always been and will always be in one form or another. We do not need to resolve the paradoxes to appreciate the wonder. We do not need to choose between the block universe and presentism to recognize that time, whatever it is extraordinary. It gives us the sense of narrative, of progress, of becoming. It allows for change, for growth, for the unfolding of complexity. And it does all of this whether or not it has a beginning, whether or not it will have an end. The now is enough. The present, eternal or fleeting, is the only place we ever are. So we let ourselves rest in this moment, this eternal present, and we let go of the need to locate it in a story with a clear start and finish. We let the universe be what it is, vast and strange and patient, and we let ourselves be what we are, small and curious and alive here in the only time we have, the now that never stops being now. And in that letting go, in that acceptance, there is a quiet peace, the peace that comes from knowing that we are part of something far older and far stranger than we can ever fully understand, and that this, right now, is exactly where we belong. The night is still out there, beyond the windows, beyond the last light of the furthest city. The stars are still burning, light still traveling, space still stretching in its slow, patient way. And the question we began with, the question of whether the universe has a beginning or an end, remains unanswered. Not because we have failed to search, but because the answer, if it exists, lies beyond the reach of our current knowing, perhaps beyond the reach of any knowing. But in that unanswered space, we have found something else. We have found images and ideas that stretch the mind, that open up vistas of possibility, that remind us how much larger and stranger existence is than we tend to imagine in our day-to-day lives. We have walked beside notions of infinite space and cyclic time, of fields that hum beneath reality and horizons that invite rather than confine. We have let ourselves wonder without demanding certainty, without insisting on closure. And there is a kind of freedom in that, the freedom to not know, to live with mystery, to let the universe be vast and strange without needing to shrink it down to something manageable. We are small, yes. Our lives are brief. Our understanding is limited. But we are also part of this, part of the endless unfolding, the eternal becoming, the quiet and patient existence of all that is. And that is enough. That is more than enough. The cosmos does not hurry. It does not demand our comprehension. It simply continues, vast and calm, breathing or expanding or cycling or simply being in ways we can glimpse but never fully hold. And we, for this brief moment, are here to witness it, to let its strangeness wash over us like starlight, to carry a little piece of that wonder with us as we move through our days. The universe may have no beginning and no end, or it may have both in ways we have not yet imagined. Either way, it is here, and so are we, and that is a miracle, quiet enough to let us sleep. If these wanderings have brought you some measure of calm, some gentle sense of awe, then perhaps you will return to this place, where the infinite and the intimate meet, where the cosmos unfolds in whispers. Until then, rest easy, knowing the stars are patient and the night is wide, and the universe, however it began or however it might end, is holding you now in its vast and gentle arms.